Welcome to Perusing's Appraisers on Purpose podcast. Our podcast showcases inspiring appraisers and professionals from the industry who are leaders in their field. How did they get to where they are? What have they learned along the way? What can we learn from them? Your host is real estate investor, entrepreneur, and appraiser, Michael Hobbs.
Welcome back, and thanks once again for being part of this amazing community, the Perusing's podcast, The Power of Values. Another just engaging and experienced peer has a fascinating pathway, yellow brick road as we like to call it, of their professional journey. Before we jump in, you're going to find some great takeaways from today. Make sure to share those in the comments. Of course, definitely like this podcast on the platform that you're listening to, whether that's over on the Spotify platform, or if you're over there on iTunes, or if you're now listening to this recorded podcast on YouTube. Definitely appreciate all that. I have no doubt that when you're done, you're like, oh my goodness, I know a few people I need to share this with. So be generous and share. With that, I am so excited to introduce our guest, Jeff Morley. Jeff, thanks for joining us.
Well, I appreciate the invite, Michael. I'm excited to be here.
Wonderful, wonderful. Jeff, inquiring minds want to know, as they used to say in earlier decades. Were you born this way, or how did your life intersect the appraisal and valuation profession?
Well, that's a fun question to kick things off with. I very much have to say that I fall in the category of born this way. It wasn't
born this way. Whoa, tell us about that.
You bet. Well, it wasn't an inevitable career path for me, at least initially. But on the other hand, I can share. In fact, I'll share this in part because the statute of limitations, I'm sure, has passed. And even if it hadn't been, I would have hopefully be tried as a minor here. But one of my earliest memories in life, and my dad loves to tell this story, was him having parked us in the parking lot of his office early on. Had to run into the appraisal office to get something, and told me, and I think my sister at the time, stay in the truck, do not come in, I'll be right out.
Yep.
And the next thing he hears is somebody that he knows, I don't remember if it's a secretary or somebody, comes in and says, "Craig, there's a little boy peeing out of the back of your truck in the parking lot." Dad said to stay in the truck, so I did what I was told, but I also had nature call at the same time. So he thought it was too funny to get too mad at me, but
I love that.
I'm glad there weren't as many cameras back then as there are today.
You know what? All I can say is, I guess the joy of being an aging male is that sounds all too familiar. This nature calls more often now.
You bet. Yep, you bet.
Oh my goodness. So you're out. So I appreciate that you started out life in a pickup truck. Not everybody gets that opportunity.
Boy, yeah, absolutely. In fact, my dad tells the story of being down in southern Utah, which is not that far from Las Vegas. Kind of dry, hot, arid climate, and first pickup truck he had didn't have air conditioning, and driving around in the summertime with a whole bunch of water, trying to keep from getting dehydrated along the way. The nature of where I've covered and done appraisal work throughout most of my career has been kind of rural, been up in the mountains, needed something that can get off the beaten path. And I've managed to get myself stuck more than once, in the snow and in, weird environments and stuff. But
sure.
Yeah, pickup trucks have a soft spot in my heart for sure.
Oh my goodness. So that's a fascinating approach. I remember that you mentioned about the pickup truck with no air conditioning. One of my earlier, not my first, but one of my earlier jobs, worked with Big Owl Moppin'. And we drove around, I think, in a little Ford Ranger pickup truck, had a cab on the back. And he referred to it as 280 air, which I'd never experienced before. I'm like, that's amazing. I've heard of air conditioning. I've never heard of 280 air. He goes, oh yeah, Michael, roll the windows down. We go 80 miles an hour. Feels just like air conditioning. I was like, love you, Big Al. He's like, well, love you more with your window down. Those were back in the days. So it sounds like you grew up was Dad handy, or did you have your own tool belt as a kid, or how did you and real estate and ultimately appraisal come together?
Yeah, well, great question. My dad kind of came out of a family that had a construction background and some other, real estate interests and that sort of a thing. For me early on, I never really looked at appraisal as the the career path I was going to go. I didn't have any real, aversion to it, but didn't really think seriously about it as I was younger and growing up. I had a few jobs, kind of in and around the real estate space. The first job I ever remember doing was, we had a contractor friend who was building a little townhome subdivision, like two street townhome subdivision. And so he'd hire me for a couple hours after, middle school to walk 5 or 6 blocks over to where his project was and do general cleanup. And in time, he entrusted me to drive around the backhoe and pick up, construction debris and that sort of a thing. I managed to back it into one of his block walls at one point, which he was gracious about. Fortunately, didn't kick me off the side or anything. But, I felt like I'd earned a certain level of trust when he allowed me to put this strip of decorative tile along the front face of the houses. I was like, first time I'd done anything,
Wow.
at that point in my career where I was like, hey, I can point to something that I did as, having contributed to building a house. It was a very minor contribution, obviously, but a good experience. Several years I did that.
Can I, for everybody's benefit, Jeff, because I'm totally in sync with everything you shared, but you shared something which it brings to mind a funny story my mom used to tell when she asked. My family's from farming and quite familiar with farm equipment, implement, livestock, you name it, crops, that kind of thing. And my mom tells this funny story about when she's sitting around the dinner table, and my dad was the oldest boy in the family, and we'd routinely spend weekends back down there. He'd help out on the family farm. And this one particular dinner conversation was going on. I was too young to really remember this, but Mom used to tell the story, and she looked over to my father-in-law, whose name was Ed. She's like, Ed, I'm sorry. I hear y'all talking, and I have no idea what kind of animal a backhoe is. So could you describe what a backhoe is, Jeff? Because I can remember when my mom, there's another funny story, but I won't tell that one. But help people understand who might be more city folk. What is a backhoe that you were driving?
Yeah, you bet. It was, this wasn't necessarily on the farm, but it was kind of the one piece of equipment that this general contractor had that, you got the bucket that you set up in front. It's got a front end loader that would scoop dirt, level out lots. It's what I used it for was I'd go pull it up in front of the house and then load and carry all of the lumber or other construction debris that needed to get dumped in the dumpster that was on site. So I used it to haul trash back and forth. But then on the back, it's got a digging arm, type of an apparatus, and they'd use that to dig, sprinkler lines or pipes or sewer lines and that sort of a thing. Pretty convenient piece of equipment for that type of a job site.
Very much so.
And frankly, as a 14 or 15-year-old, I look back at it and think, I don't know what he was thinking and trusted me with the keys to drive that thing around. But I kept the damage relatively minimal. I didn't run it into the houses or anything.
Yeah, that's helpful, Jeff. The other thing is, you mentioned being at that pivotal age. I mean, you weren't 6, and at 14 or 15, a backhoe doesn't go very fast. So it's not like getting up on the, on the roads or much less the interstate out there hauling it 55, 60 miles an hour. So there's not too much damage you can do. You can do some damage, but not too much damage you could do at low speeds.
That's exactly right. Yeah, and unfortunately, that was probably the only reason he entrusted me with it in the first place, is I couldn't go spin donuts in the parking lot or anything with it.
Yes. That it can't. Yeah. Many of us remember donuts in the parking lot. Not doing that with a backhoe. Oh my goodness. So how long was that? You said that was kind of a summer kind of opportunity and after school kind of cleanup type of opportunity came your way?
Yeah. Yep. Kind of the first real job that I had. And then as I got old enough to get a driver's license, my dad was busy enough at the time that he did hire me to come and do a little bit of support, after school and, as available. I went and took some pictures for him. This was back in the days. It was just transitioning kind of mid to late 90s to being able to email files. But
so was your dad an appraiser?
Yes. Yep.
Oh, because you mentioned about some construction and what have you. So your dad, was he a lifelong appraiser? Or did he kind of get into that, or how did that? So you grew up around this a little bit.
I did. Yeah, I did.
Okay.
And that's part of the reason for the, born this way, take, I think, is that, so my dad came out, had a construction background early on, but decided he wanted to get into something different. So early in his career, he got into appraising. I, and that was, really what he's done all of, my living memory was, him being an appraiser. And
Yes.
so, as I got old enough to drive around, they still had to deliver 3 printed out hard copies of appraisal reports to the banks and credit unions around town. So they'd hire me to make the delivery routes in the afternoons and occasionally, go get pictures or something like that. It was early enough that I remember photocopying maps of different neighborhoods out of the back of the phone book to make
Wow.
sure I could figure out where these houses and streets were in these, windy neighborhoods and stuff.
I love it. So that is such a great indoctrination. So Dad was around construction. Was he a GC for himself, or did he work for others? Like, how much exposure did you get around the construction industry?
So his dad was in masonry, did a lot of that.
Okay.
And I remember, very, very early on, even before, my dad had really gotten full time into the appraisal side, going on a job site up in, I think it was Evanston, Wyoming, in the middle of the winter time. They had these
Yes.
big space heaters in this bus depot or something. And he did a lot with laying brick and block and that sort of a thing. Was a lot of his exposure. His dad and brother had gone on to do more general contracting, and he decided to branch out more into the valuation space, early in
Wow.
my life, and that's pretty
Yeah.
much all I remember is him being an appraiser.
Oh, wow. Fascinating. So, when did appraising really intersect your life? What age were you at that point?
So yeah, great question. It wasn't really until college. I mean, so in high school, I was doing some of this, kind of, gopher type work, go
Sure.
drop this stuff off or get the pictures or whatever. But so I had a little bit of exposure to it, and I didn't think a lot of it, honestly, at the time. It was something to do during high school to earn a few bucks. I didn't hate it, but I also wasn't thinking this is where I'm going to land as far as a career. After high school, I went on kind of a 2-year hiatus, went on a church mission for 2 years and lived down in Argentina.
Uh-huh.
Great experience, great life experience, met lots of people and just
Sure.
had a lot of exposure to things outside of, what my life had been to that point. One of the things I'd hoped was that having had some life exposure, I'd come back with a clear vision of what I wanted to do going forward. And I didn't really. So I
Oh,
decided, well, I'll start
okay.
going to college. And I liked a lot of the math and engineering courses that I took. I was
Sure.
thinking about going into engineering,
Yes.
into college. Uh, but what I found is I'm grateful that they did, but they had an intro to engineering course that really took us to a bunch of different engineering operations around town, from civil to mechanical. We went to the water treatment, facility, and it was really helpful for me to get a sense of what, engineers were doing day in and day out. And as I went through that, I kind of came to the realization that none of it was really grabbing me in the sense of thinking this is what I want to do, for the rest of my life, or this looks particularly interesting. And so it wasn't until I was probably halfway through my college education that I decided, well, maybe I'll look more seriously at this appraisal thing. So started taking the qualifying education courses,
Oh, wow.
working, a little bit more hands-on, from end to end in the appraisal process instead of just here are the couple of things I need you to go, do for me. And
Yes, sir.
it's turned out to be a really good fit. I enjoyed the aspects of not being stuck behind a computer all day, but also not out swinging a hammer all day. There was a little bit of in and out of the office aspect that I liked, and found that I really enjoyed the puzzle of, pulling together all of the data pieces and coming up with what you hope are credible, opinions of value on, houses and commercial properties and everything in between.
Oh, I got that. That's phenomenal. So so for your all state, when you first started taking your courses, did you all have licensing and certification, or just go straight to certification? Like, when did you, I guess, officially enter the profession, as opposed to, helping out and kind of doing support work?
Yeah, you bet. So it was early 2000s, I think around 2002, where I decided to enter, the profession or get, work towards
Oh,
getting the license. And so
yeah.
the Appraisal Institute had a 2-week course with all of the principles and procedures, the intro classes.
Nice.
I went down and spent 2 weeks, doing the education in person down there. Great experience. 2 kind of long weeks, but it was a good introduction to a lot of the theory behind the appraisal process. In our state, as you asked about the licensing, it's interesting. Ours is one of the few, if only, that require that an appraiser get licensed before going on to certification, certified residential or general. So
yes, sir.
I had to get the license first, and then after that, took the additional education to get certified general. And from the start to finish, I think my first date of certification was 2005 or somewhere or thereabouts.
Yeah, fascinating. So, did you you take the classes, you got exposed to engineering through your university work? Did you go to work for your dad? Did you go to work for somebody else? Like, how did you get started in the appraisal and valuation profession?
Yeah, you bet. So my dad had partnered up with an MAI. At the time, he was doing a lot of residential work. So they had partnered together and decided to be able to offer residential and commercial services.
Got
He
it.
he was doing some commercial at the time and has since done a lot more. But
Yes.
They decided to take a chance on me and hire me on. And I'd work with each of them on individual assignments that they had, from houses to kind of the gamut of commercial type properties. And it's one of the things, Michael, that I found that was really helpful for me and that has proven to be helpful for others is having experience from more than just a single appraiser as a mentor or a supervisor.
Yes.
And frankly, having experience in the residential and the commercial space, I think makes somebody better. Most appraisers will decide to focus either on one or the other. A few will do both. It's challenging,
Yes.
to try to do both. But I found that it's really a valuable background to have experience in both of those spaces, where you're writing in a narrative format and in a lot of commercial reports, scope of work and certifications and stuff that are a little different than what you get with GSE lending forms that have a lot of that
Yes.
stuff hard coded in. And so I was fortunate to have that experience and opportunity to work in both of those spaces early on and get a pretty good background in commercial and residential.
That's phenomenal. And did you get to do both pretty consistently, or did you kind of help out in both and then more actively move into one lane of appraising versus another?
Well, so what's ended up happening is, as the market has fluctuated, which it does, we found that the residential and the commercial markets don't always follow the exact same path, or at least at the same time. And so I found myself spending more time in one or the other, depending on where the biggest need was. We do have appraisers in our local firm here that do just residential and others that do just commercial. But my dad and I have both, kind of stayed in both lanes, but with an emphasis on one over the other.
Yes.
When the market really took a downturn on the residential side in 2008 and 9, we found that there was still a lot of demand for commercial appraisal services. A lot of banks had distressed assets that they wanted appraisals redone every 6 or 12 months as they were monitoring and had FDIC regulators coming in and auditing their books. And so I have found that it's fluctuated a little bit depending on where the most demand was for the services.
Oh, that's helpful. I mean, I would agree with you that the broader exposure, my personal experience, and especially just bouncing it off with others from their perspective, rounds out in a healthy way. And the opportunity to approach valuation challenges, valuation situations, and come up with maybe easier, better, more credible results. Because there's someone else described it, going back to the construction site reference, got multiple tools in the tool belt, as opposed to approaching everything saying, I've got a hammer and a screwdriver. You got a wrench? Like, no, I don't need a wrench. I'm like, no, you're going to need a wrench. And in dealing with different steps of the valuation process in commercial versus in residential, like you said, not being constrained to a form really does force a different level of thinking when you're writing, when you're trying to convey your thoughts in a narrative report. How did the training work? Did Dad say, Jeff, this is great, I'm taking you, or I'm definitely not taking you, you got to work with my partner?
Well, he wasn't up for taking me on exclusively. So
Sure.
it's funny you ask. I remember we went and bought just a small little, like glass type of a desk that we set up in the corner of his office. And so
Okay.
I'd sit there right behind him and turn around all day long. It felt like asking him questions of what goes here, or how do you do that, or where do I find this? But I did spend time with him and with his partner on the different assignments that they had. And I remember early on, it was a little bit daunting to be given a narrative report and say, hey, we need you to go appraise or work on this a file for an office or industrial building or something. Here's the last one I did. Take it and run with it. So you were constantly doing the best you could, asking questions, getting feedback, going back and doing the best you could again. But
Yeah.
it was good to have experience and exposure from more than, just my dad or his partner, I think, because they had different, outlooks, different ways to approach the problems. And it's been beneficial, but it was a lot of it early on was, just sitting there pestering him all day long, with questions about how you go through this process.
Very much so. And when you reflect on those early days and you talk about the different perspective between, say, dad and his partner on approaching the assignments, what's something that comes to mind that was a clear difference, even though they were both professional real estate appraisers, that both also contributed to you ultimately understanding having a broader perspective generally is quite good.
Boy, absolutely. Well, a lot of it was stylistic differences. My dad was a little bit more focused on how the report looked. Does it look
Yes.
good, from just an aesthetic appeal? He was inclined to put a little more analysis or verbiage, just kind of descriptions in there. His partner, Stan, who, was an MAI and a great appraiser, was more simplistic in the analysis or like the description of, what was going on. And, certainly not to a level of, of being negative or a problem, but it was just interesting to see how two different appraisers would describe a property or the depth to which they would, dive in, providing data or worrying about, how graphs or charts looked, in the report or that sort of a thing. The other differences too, but those were a couple that really kind of stood out as, he likes to do it this way, whereas the other one likes to do it a little bit different.
Well, that's a helpful highlight. There's not always a right way and a wrong way, but there are different approaches and different things to focus from a priority standpoint. When for you, obviously, as you touched on, being in that area of Utah and being exposed in a more rural setting, you get an opportunity to see a much broader array of property types than someone who's in maybe a nice suburban area. What was one of those early assignments, difficult ones probably, where you're like, I don't even know how to do this, but thanks for giving me a prior report to give me some kind of starting roadmap. What pops out back in those early days with dad and his partner?
Boy, you definitely know the rural, some of the realities of working in the rural space. You don't even ask that question, Michael, because it was interesting. Anything that commercial that was in one of these small rural towns. I mean, you were just glad to have any. I mean, if I'm doing a small office building somewhere, I'm happy to have anything within a couple county radius. I may be 50 miles away to find the next small town office building that sold or something. And even in some cases, houses. We had to go look at comps that were 10, 20, 30 miles away sometimes. So a couple of those early rural commercial properties were particularly challenging. I remember one as I was getting going, working on some condemnation, eminent domain type of stuff in a small rural county.
Yeah.
Where in this particular case, it was a power line easement that was, it was supposed to be an easement, but these small entities, that don't deal with condemnation frequently, don't always follow the right procedures. And
wait, Jeff, people don't actually follow the procedures with the course of law? That's crazy.
Well, I found that the Department of Transportation that deals with that stuff day in and day out knows the process pretty well. But, a small rural electric provider thought they had an easement to go up the backside of these lots up in a mountain kind of resort area. They didn't actually have the easement, but they went in and mowed down a big corridor to put in a new power line. And it turned out that one of the houses, had this power line that you couldn't quite reach out and touch from the deck, but you could touch it with a fishing pole. I mean, it was just right off the back of the deck. And I remember, my dad's partner, Stan, was talking about, or just made the comment about how, a lot of times if people would just have better interpersonal skills, it could resolve some of the problems. But the homeowner comes out ticked off, and the power company says, yeah, no, we're good to be here, and we don't care that you don't like this. We're going forward. So they put the line in, and then through litigation discovered that they didn't actually have the easement to do it, and it was a big damages case. And I remember thinking, like, how do you figure out what the value impact is on this thing? And there were just a lot of challenges that early on in the career, it was a great learning experience. But man, I had a lot of questions trying to help work through that one.
Oh, that is indeed a phenomenal, both in and of itself, a damages case is always fascinating, but also to overlay the eminent domain piece to it, which is a whole nother body of knowledge. I mean, again, one of those rewarding attributes of being in rural areas, you definitely broaden the way you look at property. I mean, it's not just, like it's an office here, it's a house over there, it's an outbuilding over here, that's the one, commercial space in this, stop and go light town. I mean, all those kind of things. Other people have no sense of what you're talking about.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And, one of the things I found that has helped in that is, in a town so small they didn't even have a stoplight.
Yes.
A number of years ago, we came across a building that I don't even remember why I was looking, but I saw something like on a Craigslist offering that was a small little commercial building listed for sale. The post office had a long-term lease on it, and then there was a small little health care provider on the other side of the building. And small little town, they were asking $110,000 for this 2,500 square foot building, and decided, hey, that might be an interesting investment or something.
Oh, sure.
And so we, my brother and I decided to go ahead and buy it. And, it was, as we went through the process, and I found this, I have been involved, not on a large scale, but on a fairly consistent scale of either developing or buying and selling, real estate in these markets in which you're operating. It just gives you a better and a much different perspective on what buyers and sellers are actually thinking when you are an active participant at some point or at some level. Many have bought a house or sold a house, and you kind of know what you look for or value in terms of attributes in that regard. But in this process, we discovered that the healthcare provider was vacating that part of the building. Came back and said, well, look, if we're losing half of the rent, like we can't pay more than half of about the price, because we don't know who in the heck is going to, lease that space in this town of 500 people or whatever it was. And so it was an interesting, a very interesting but helpful experience to say, okay, well, here's how an investor really thinks about this from a cash flow and evaluation perspective.
Did you all proceed with that acquisition?
Well, I didn't think we were going to. When we discovered that they were losing half of the leased area from the one tenant vacating, I said, look, I'm sorry, you probably not going to want to do this, but we can't pay more than about half of that purchase price based on what the cash flow is going to be. And it shocked me. The guy came back and said, well, I guess you bought yourself a post office building. So we did go forward and consummate the thing. And
good for you.
It was good. It was a good experience. It was kind of funny how it ended up playing out, but we just said, we only are looking at this from an investment perspective. And if the numbers work, that's great. They probably don't. So that's fine too. But it actually ended up working out, which was kind of fun.
Did you all end up moving your office, create an office and move to the other half of the building? Or how'd you all solve that vacancy issue? Or did you not need to because the rent supported the price that you actually paid?
Well, we considered a number of options. This was about 2 hours away from where our primary office is. And so we weren't having any luck convincing people to relocate to that small of a rural community from where we were. In the end, we thought about, well, geez, can we turn this thing into an Airbnb or something? We got a little bit of resistance from the town with zoning and that sort of a thing. So when it was all said and done, we ended up not finding a tenant, not really needing to, because the price reflected the ability to have it carry itself with just the post office lease. And so we held on to it for a few years and then ended up wanting to get into something else and sold it. And it worked out well, but it just gives a new perspective to valuing that sort of thing. I remember providing information on that to a couple of the commercial appraisers in our office as a comp to use for probably the next 3 years when they were getting anything, in the couple of county radius there that they had to try to go appraise.
80% of all businesses fail within 5 years, according to the U.S. Census Bureau. With so many roles and responsibilities that must be managed and have nothing to do with appraisal reports, is it any surprise that it's hard to keep up, much less having a sense of peace, stability, and profitability that comes from growing your business? Given all of this, you might already be thinking about exiting your business one day. Don't miss the limited opportunity to work with Michael, a real estate expert and professional coach. He has worked with more than 300 owners and entrepreneurs to find their highest and best use by solving problems that reach their most important goals. Compress decades of learning into days by working with Michael. Michael is famous in real estate and business coaching. With his help, you can accelerate your growth, increase your quality of life, and earn more money, all while ultimately doing less. Michael helps you not just grow your business, but also find new purpose in it and in your life. If you're ready to take control instead of being controlled, contact him on LinkedIn or email him at michaelh@paru.com.
That is that's such a great point you touch on, that for city folk don't really understand that, you get one sale. Boy, that thing gets used all the time. I mean, that's just like a wash rag. I mean, you're always out there using it, cleaning it up, putting it right back out, using it again. You're like, oh yeah, we've got this we've got this retail space. Oh yeah, we got one sale in 3 years over there in that little 500 person town. That's a fantastic sale, because it's the only
we're
one.
going to use it for everything. Yep, absolutely. And but it does highlight the value of the data. I mean, when a neighbor heard that somebody down the street sold a property, I mean, your ears perk up, and you really dive in to try to find out if you can verify the sale and get the information, because you're going to need it. It's incredibly valuable, as opposed to one of 500 sales that you could lean on.
That is definitely the case. Wow, what an amazing experience you get to have along the way. What and for you, Jeff, I mean, getting that opportunity to work with family, that's a great experience. Did you all stay just kind of focused in your geographic area, or did you all expand at any point to cover a greater portion of the state of Utah, or cross over into Vegas, or how did you all go about the next 5 to 10 years?
Yeah, a really good question, Michael. So as I got up and going, one of the things I found, and I'm grateful for this perspective, that my dad's always shared, is that, being able and willing to go places that others don't want to or aren't going is valuable, and it helps you when there are ups and downs in the market. And I think other guests you've had on have touched on this as well. But I kind of took over for a time, doing stuff that was up in the mountains, different type of a market. There were appraisers in the valley that wanted to stay in the valley, and there were very few that wanted to go up into the mountains. And so I got to know, most of the real estate agents and market participants up there. My dad actually expanded, he was covering a lot of that, decided to expand a little bit to the south, down into Nevada, Las Vegas, and a few communities between here and there. And it's turned out, having the property type variation, as well as a broader geographic coverage, has really been helpful in the long run. For us, that's where a lot of the memorable experiences for me have come, is being up on the mountain, getting stuck in the snow, trying to research or find comps that aren't mapped, and all of these fun sorts of things. But you get pretty proficient with figuring things out. And I'll tell you, a lot of the homes up on the mountain were second homes, and I multiple times have had people literally give us like a treasure map of, we've got a key you can use to get in, but it's under the third rock behind the post of the off the deck, or it's hidden in this place that nobody would ever think to look. And you make sure you've got those notes down really well, because you don't want to drive an hour and a half and not be able to find the key, and then have to come back and have them give you the instructions again. And some of those areas don't have cell reception. I mean, you're just hoping that you have what you need, because you're kind of out of civilization until you get back.
Yeah, there's nothing better than having to drive back 5 or 10 miles to get cell reception, to ask the question about why you can't find what you're looking for when you're on site.
That's exactly right.
Oh my goodness.
I have had to do that before, and it can certainly be frustrating, but it's just one of those things that you kind of take for granted. If you're in the metro, you plan on having cell reception. But, because of that, I always paid pretty close attention to making sure in the wintertime I had good tires. I had a snow shovel and snow boots and even sometimes snowshoes in the back of my pickup, just for when I came across, weird or unexpected scenarios. But I didn't want to get stuck somewhere where I didn't have cell reception and couldn't find anybody to help me. And so, the little things like that you definitely think about when you're in precarious terrain and not, with a cell phone readily available to call for help.
That is definitely the case. As you think back to some of those precious experiences, taking on the assignments up in the mountains when others didn't, what type of properties did you experience? What type of terrain? And in this case, really like once in a lifetime experiences that you got to have because you were taking on these assignments?
There were several times that I was asked to do appraisals in a subdivision that did not have plowed year-round access. It was 7-8 miles off the highway. The only way to get there was on a snowmobile. And so I told the clients, look, I can go do it, but you have to understand I can't drive to it. So I'm going to have to rent a snowmobile and then drive in to go look at this thing and then getting comp pictures, on the snowmobile. It was actually, it's always pretty fun. You're charging extra and getting to go ride around for half the day, on a snowmobile and doing the inspections and stuff. So that in that particular subdivision, and probably 3 or 4 times I was able to go do that. There was one time where, and this was kind of what cemented in my mind that I'm not going to be stuck without tire chains for my tires and decent tires in the first place. There was a small little subdivision that was down a hill, and it was a county road that was not well maintained. It wasn't graded well. It was plowed, but not very well. And I probably took 10 or 15, maybe 20 runs at this hill trying to get up it in my truck that didn't have very good tires at the time. Couldn't make it. So I happened to know somebody that worked at the town office there. I called him and said, hey, is there anything you can do to help me? I'm stuck down here. He came over with a tow strap and hooked me up to his truck, and we both tried to, make our way up this hill. We both got stuck or failed, and so he said, "Let me call the town snowplow." I had this big diesel Caterpillar snowplow with chains on its tires, and so it worked its way over, hooked to his truck, and then we hooked from his truck to my truck, and so we were this kind of parade of
daisy chain
clowns trying to make it out of this place. And then that cat, man, it just walked right up the hill like it didn't know that we were behind it.
Wow.
But I wasn't getting out of there that night if he didn't have the ability to call in some heavy duty help. So that was definitely memorable.
That was impressive. I mean, and the power of knowing who to call too makes a big difference.
Boy, I was grateful that I knew the town. I think he was the town manager at the time, if I remember right. But and interestingly, I hadn't really thought about this, but because I had done a little bit of construction and development in that particular town, I knew some of the people there well from being in, applying for building permits and that sort of a thing. And so there was definitely a better connection than what I would have had if I was just in and out, doing appraisal and not involved with some of the local building inspector and town manager and that sort of a thing. So it was fortunate that I had the right contact at the time, because I was not going to get out there that night if I didn't.
Maybe a sleeping bag was part of those additional accessories that went in the trunk, it sounds like.
I was hoping not to ever have to use one, but that would have been the case that night had I not had somebody that had much more impressive equipment than I did at the time.
What, given the opportunity to appraise properties that are not accessible year round, for the perspective of those who don't do mountain properties and don't appraise second homes, what are some of the characteristics that you had to learn about to become more familiar with the interests of buyers and sellers of those kind of properties?
Yeah, that's a great question, Michael. One of the things that really stands out is simply access and utilities. And in a lot of these areas, it's not uncommon to have properties that are completely off the grid with no public utilities. So they've either got a private well or hauled in water. And a lot of these areas that bury tanks or have a big water holding tank in the basement that the owners would then have to go to the fire station and fill up a smaller tank on a trailer and literally haul their water in and then they'd have a pressure pump and that sort of a thing. And I remember doing a review on an appraisal one time that just to check the box, yeah, this has public water, and it didn't, that the house didn't. And it just made a real difference on even which comps you should look at, because your buyer pool for somebody that's out of the town limits and doesn't have public utilities is different than ones that say, yeah, I don't want to buy something where I got to haul my own water or manage a generator and solar power, solar panels and that sort of a thing. Septics weren't as big of a deal, whether you had septic or sewer, but the power source and the water source were a real factor in what lots sold for and what houses would sell for. And then obviously, as you can imagine, if you got a snowmobile in, if it's not a year-round maintained road, that's a real consideration as well for people. And the pricing, very distinctly reflected, the realities of each of those things.
That, that just takes it to a whole nother level when you start to consider this idea of, being off the grid. People might have heard that terminology, may have never dealt with that experience. And then, to this same extent, having to get your arms around, the people who very much look forward to, appreciate, and value that type of property experience, that type of natural setting, that type of privacy and remoteness.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah, that's part of the appeal. That's why those people buy. But that buyer pool is different from the one that wants to be, just a couple of miles away, but in the resort with year-round access and year-round utilities and that sort of a thing. And so, just understanding some of those market dynamics in the various geographies was critical. That was part of the reason that many appraisers weren't as interested in trying to figure out a new market, was because of some of those detailed nuances that made a big difference. But you had to understand not just what does my subject have, but what do the comparable properties have. And it takes some real effort to understand those differences and some experience in the market to be able to accurately reflect what those what the various properties had, because you could have stuff that was really within a half a mile or a quarter of a mile that had very different access and utilities, and you just had to be aware of those things.
Oh, that completely makes sense. So over over the course of time, I hear about taking on you all choosing to be the individuals that got called when other people either couldn't or wouldn't take on an assignment, expanding a bit of the geography. Has that kind of continued to be the approach, or how have things continued to evolve for you over the last 5 to 10 years?
You bet. Well, in a couple of ways. One of the things that has also been a very enjoyable experience that not many of the appraisers in our area have had has been to be employed by the local county assessor's office or the county to be a hearing officer for Board of Equalization.
Oh,
so when they have homeowners that will want to come in and appeal their properties, it's kind of interesting because, in that setting, they have chosen to use appraisers not to provide appraisals, but because appraisers know the real estate market well. But in that setting, they really employ you to be a decision maker, kind of a, maybe not this formal, but kind of like an administrative law judge or something, where the homeowner will come in and say, hey, I think my property is overvalued for these reasons. The assessor, or their appraiser in the assessor's office will say, either we think we're supported, with this data, or we probably should adjust it or something. But at the end of the day, the hearing officer will then go in and make the decision based on the evidence provided, not them appraising it, but them making a recommendation to the county of, this value is probably fair, or I recommend that it should be adjusted based on the evidence presented. And, there are a handful of appraisers in our area that have, been asked to, provide that service. And it's just one of those little kind of tangential experiences that you have as an appraiser that isn't just sitting down and writing an appraisal report, whether residential or commercial, but a different aspect of seeing how the appraiser's skills and knowledge can be applied. That's really been quite interesting and insightful. Most of the time those have been pretty straightforward hearings, but sometimes people have gotten pretty emotional and being frustrated and they're unhappy about the tax policy or how the taxes are being spent or whatever. And it's like, look, I'm not making those decisions. I can only tell you, whether the value here looks like it ought to be adjusted or not. But that's been one of those kind of experiences that's kept us busy in a diversified way that has been really rewarding when it's as we've gone through it.
Yeah, that again, another example of saying yes where other people say no, and getting to
Mm-hmm.
broaden perspective. I mean, I think that's a common theme I continue to appreciate about what I know about you and your dad and the firm, and that is be a yes to clients, and then it's kind of like throwing your hat, as they say, throwing your hat in the ring, and then jumping in and figuring out what the heck are we going to do. Getting competent along the way a lot of times. That's how that goes.
That's exactly right, and it's a little bit
Oh yeah,
uncomfortable.
it is.
Sometimes more than a little bit. I remember one of the first hearings that I was, the hearing officer for. An attorney had come in, and I don't know what he was thinking exactly. I mean, he was appealing the property value on his own
Okay.
house, and I don't know if he just thought he was just going to argue his way to a lower
An
value or
attorney
something, but
argued their way to. Oh,
had,
come on, that doesn't happen, does it?
yeah, exactly. What could he have been thinking, right? But he had no evidence, no information as to why it was overassessed, just that he didn't like it and thought that it was, and that wasn't that uncommon in and of itself. But what was interesting was he got pretty emotional and pretty heated about the fact that we weren't going to recommend a change, even though he had no evidence to support the recommendation for a
Yeah.
change. And it was just a good reminder that sometimes people even if they work in a professional line or setting can still be emotional about their real estate, especially your personal home and that sort of a
Yes.
thing. And we were able to get through it, but I was thinking, man, I hope we don't have to like call in security or something, and we didn't. But it was one of the more memorable hearings that I'd sat
Yeah,
through.
that's it. What was it? Dragnet, the old Dragnet. Just the facts, ma'am. Just the facts. Hey, I appreciate you don't feel that this is the right thing, and yes, this is an opinion of value, but these are pretty good facts too, and we're gonna be sticking to the facts, which changes that
Absolutely.
dynamic. Changes, especially when someone's winning formula suddenly is not succeeding. It's like, I don't have a backup plan. You're supposed to react differently, and you're like, no. Then they elevate it, and you're like, no. And then they eventually run out of gas and walk away dejected. And get what in this case it sounds like, based on the opinion of more than one professional, get what they rightfully deserved.
You may as well have been sitting in the hearing, Michael, because that's pretty much how it went.
Been through a couple of those. I'm sure a few of our listeners have as well. Just the joys of those things. Wow, that's what an amazing experience. What? So you've also been involved in a bigger perspective in the industry. I'd love to hear how that came about for you guys in the firm.
Sure. Yeah, you bet. In that spirit or vein of trying new things or expanding out or being willing to see where an opportunity might take you. We did have an opportunity that had come up to get involved with at the time what was a franchise kind of appraisal company or organization that had appraisal firms in multiple markets around the country with the desire or intention of trying to gain some larger contract type of assignments and work. And I think it was a really good experience. We learned a lot of things that some that worked well and others that didn't work so well. But that's kind of the nature of business, and we've had periods of time where just appraisal in general has been good and not so good, depending on whether it's a busy time or not. But one of the things that I really valued and have taken away, well, a few things I've taken away, I guess, from that experience was, so we had joined with a firm that was called Security, and at the time it was focused on franchising, and one of the real benefits was I kind of assumed, just due to the lack of creativity, I guess, or something, that I would be an appraiser in this small little southwest corner of the state, maybe expanding over state lines a little bit, but that my connections would be limited geographically. Yes. And it's been such a rewarding experience to get to know other appraisers from around the country, including in your backyard. I know you had Tommy Nizzo on here, and I've had the opportunity through that connection to work closely with Tom and other peers in Chicagoland and all around the country. It really opened some doors to meet and get to know very interesting, very successful, very just impressive appraisers in markets around the country that, as we learned, one of the challenges was, trying to get a bunch of independent firms that were kind of had their own culture and had done things the way they had done them forever to, for lack of a better expression, march to the same beat of a drum. There were some challenges with that, but it kind of parlayed into an opportunity to move away from a franchising approach or aspect into more of a direct employment model for a national appraisal firm. And so as a result of the connections and experience earlier on, I've been able to, be involved with Security that is now focused on hiring, staff appraisers in different markets around the country, providing support services to them. I've played a pretty big role in a lot of the onboarding, training, recruiting, just being involved with appraisers. And so I still am doing appraisal work day to day, but I'm also, blessed to have the opportunity to work with a lot of great people in markets around the country. And it's been really rewarding. It's been challenging, in a lot of ways. And we started this direct employment model just right as the pandemic had started. January 1st of 2020 was, when we'd kicked that, kind of initiative, that focus off. And then 3 months later, the pandemic comes, and, who knows what to expect. And, we're glad to have been endowed as essential workers, as appraisers generally, allowed us to at least keep working and functioning. But, it's been an interesting ride, on that, from that time through this, interest rate increase environment and a dramatic slowdown in volumes. And I think everybody's felt that, to some extent. But it really has led to some opportunities I just never thought I would have the privilege of having, and people I never thought I'd get to know. And it's really been a very enjoyable experience, even with the ups and downs that come with trying to take on a bigger adventure.
Yeah, I appreciate you touching on that. A lot of people, there's so much that goes on way beyond someone's local market, and they don't necessarily have a sense of the, in this case, an entrepreneurial endeavor to unite others across the country. You mentioned about having the responsibility for onboarding and training and recruiting. How have you all sought to grow? Is that kind of the old school approach where you call up the building department and say, hey, who are some good appraisers? Or do you jump into some of those, what do they call those, online chat rooms? Or, that's an interesting experience. And this is being asked both for others that might be thinking about, hey, how might we be able to expand? What can we learn from peers? And also, if someone's like, hey, I'd love to connect, like how does someone like a Jeff go about finding someone like, Jamie or Jenny or Bob?
Yeah, that's a really good question, Michael, because we've evolved and just learned a lot, over the time of trying to do that. One of our very first efforts in early 2020 was trying to reach out directly to appraisers. And in fact, one that we ended up connecting with, and it was, it's interesting. He tells the story of, I think he ended up getting a text message, if I remember right, in this case. It's like, I normally would have ignored it, but, I was just kind of, the stars aligned. And so I decided to respond, and, we got some traction. He was down in Las Vegas working, and, things worked out to where he's come together. It's been a good fit for him, a good fit for us. It was really fun. We had a lot, where either there was no response or there was, kind of critical response of, why in the world would I want to work with you guys? And said, well, if you don't want to be here, we don't want you. So that's, that works out well. But we've evolved a little bit. And for any appraiser, whether working on their own or, looking to connect or grow a company or whatever, I've observed that there are a number of different personalities, in the appraiser space, and some want to be on their own and independent, and that's great. I think there are some that thrive in that environment. That's where they should be, and I applaud them and encourage them for doing that and being successful in that space. There are others that like, whether it's the camaraderie or the stability or the resources of being part of a whether it's a local community firm or a larger regional or national firm. So I think there's room and space for all different appraiser kind of profiles or preferences as far as what they how they want to work and what they choose to do. But what we found is that trying to identify for your situation as whether it's an employer or an appraiser looking for a
Yeah,
partner or something, try to identify somebody who has a similar value set and outlook really helps. There are lots of tools, that you
sure.
can use. We've used the predictive
Yep,
index. There are multiple out there, personality tools and that sort of a thing. I've learned not to put too much stock in any one single
sure.
data point, but we've done things like a questionnaire or even like scenario based questions of, hey, you're in this scenario, what would you
Yep.
do about it? Just to get into the thought process. And just because somebody wouldn't do it the way you'd want to see it done doesn't mean they can't be a great appraiser or something, but they may not be the right fit for you. And so we've had to test and try a lot of things, but the more exposure, the more kind of feedback and input you can get from a potential, whether it's a hire or a partner or whatever, the better informed the decision will always be. And nobody's well served to make a commitment, then get into it down the road not very far and realize, well, this isn't what I thought, or you're not what I thought, and then have there be frustrations. You're better to do the vetting on the front end than try to have to unwind something that you wish you hadn't gotten into in the first place.
I thank you. I appreciate you answering the question and sharing that perspective, because I think that's it's not an appraisal industry specific thing. I do a lot of work outside the appraisal industry, work with a lot of very successful entrepreneurial owners, and hiring is by far one of the biggest challenges, and specifically hiring salespeople. We're not talking about that even at this point, but just hiring in general is so difficult. And eventually, some firms, not most, actually get to a point, it sounds like, that you all have arrived at successfully, which is identifying someone that has a similar set of values and outlook. It's so much easier to go somewhere with someone that's going in that direction than grabbing someone who's actively going in the other direction. Think of the last time you had a conversation with your spouse and it wasn't going well, or maybe one of your kids. It's just like, it's much easier to go in the same direction and then kind of turn, or just choose like, hey, we're just not going that way. So I really appreciate that. And then choosing to use one of the many tools that are out there, some of which have much greater statistical validity than others. You mentioned predictive index, which is one of the highest, that and culture index. Those are fantastic tools. And it's not about right or wrong. It's just about a reflection of who a person naturally is and what they do that they are naturally good at. And when you put someone in that space, no surprise, fulfillment is high. And, desire to perform and exceed or succeed are very much a part of the conversation. But as they say, the round peg in a square hole, and nobody wins when that happens. Short-term fix, sure, it's got to deal with it. But long-term, no chance. Not going to be there. So really appreciate that you guys are doing that. How have things, you mentioned launching in Q1 of 20, bless your all's hearts, as they say. Obviously, you're still going, and I assume things, how things are down, but that you're continuing to take progress. What's your outlook for 2024 and how you guys have continued to manage your expanding footprint?
The last year and a half has brought some real challenges, I think, for everybody. And as much as I'd love to have been immune from that, we just simply haven't been. As we look at the start of this year and going forward, we're hopeful. I think probably cautiously optimistic that we'll see some improvements just in overall market conditions, market trends. It's a constant effort, I think, to try to read where's the market at, where is the market going, and how can we be prepared for that. And so my outlook, I think, is probably cautiously optimistic that we'll see some modest growth as we go forward. There's one aspect of wanting to grow from a business perspective or business value perspective, but there's also an aspect that I've really come to appreciate of wanting to grow just for the great people that you get to know and interact with. And you want to do that responsibly and not set somebody up where the market turns and you can't keep them as busy as they need to be, and that's been a difficult reality for us to navigate. But I'm constantly impressed at how how wonderful of people and appraisers there are in all of the markets around the country. And it's humbling, but it's an enjoyable experience to get to know and rub shoulders and interact with people, in markets as we identify and bring new people on. And so I look forward to that. I enjoy that aspect of it, quite a bit, with the desire to try to, exactly like you said, put a round peg in a round hole and not a square one, because it's just tough. It's tough for everybody, and that's not where you want to be. And so it's worth doing as much diligence as you can on the front end. But I do see some recovery and some, probably modest, but I think improvements in 2024 over what the prior year and a half has been.
Got it. That's fantastic. That is great to hear. So do you still stay involved in appraising, or are you much more involved? You mentioned a lot of your responsibility is recruiting, onboarding, training. How does a typical, say, month, because I know week to week it changes, but how does a typical month look for Jeff Morley of 2024 now, I guess, compared to, say, pre-pandemic?
Yeah, you bet. Well, it's been, frankly, a bit of a mix of both. When work was a lot more abundant, I was spending more time on kind of management and support, roles in that way. As things have slowed down a little bit, I've found myself, taking on assignments as they're needed or as they're able, while, also doing some of the management as well. So it's kind of a healthy mix of both for me at the moment. Still doing some residential and some commercial assignments. We've had a larger ongoing eminent domain case, that's been years kind of in the making, with just discontent on both sides, from the Department of Transportation to the landowners. And so, there's been some on again, off again, focus on that type of a thing. But I have found that, and we've had some other, appraisers in our firm, in leadership that have been doing more production. And, Michael, I had a friend that was in the medical space. He was a pediatrician, but was also in a management space at the local hospital administration. And he made a comment to me, and this was been a long time ago now, but I see the wisdom in it, that they required that the leadership still had at least 2 days, but a couple days a week of clinicals where they were actually, seeing patients. And he said that they don't want us making rules or policies or decisions that we don't have to live with ourselves, because when you're an on the ground, practitioner, you understand some of the nuances that what might otherwise seem like a good idea that turns out not to be in practice. And so it's, continuing to do some level of just appraisal report writing has been a real blessing. It's been a real positive, for me, when I have, at some level been doing appraisal work throughout this whole journey. And it's proven to be valuable for me and my situation. And I think those that we work with.
Love it.
So probably long answer.
That's a fantastic one. And I really respect that. I think that, I remember, that just came out of nowhere when you mentioned that, but, more than a decade ago, I was sitting in some advanced education class, and Otto Spence had told me, it's like, Michael, whatever you do, and I know you got a lot of amazing stuff that you're involved in, and some big impact stuff, but don't lose sight of staying in the assignments. You don't need to be doing them every day, but don't go just get completely away from it, because there's just something. It's kind of like keeping having some of that dirt underneath your fingernails. Just there's a grounding there that's really powerful. And I appreciated that encouragement back then. And I've continued with that, sometimes more in a month than others, but always there's something going on like that. Well, Jeff, given everything that you've seen and everything you've experienced, over the next, say, 2 or 3 to 5 years, what are you hopeful about or looking forward to?
There's a lot on the horizon, and I'm hopeful and optimistic about where we're going generally as a profession. I know there's a lot of, naysayers out there. I think one of the keys for us as appraisers to be successful generally and collectively, we're supposed to be good at reading markets, it's what we do. Sometimes I think we struggle to read the market for the services that we provide and adapt to what that market is requiring or requesting of us. It's human nature to not want to have to change or adapt as we go forward. But I think the users of appraisal services are demanding something different than what has been out there in the past. It would be much easier to just do what we've always done or as we've always known to do it. But I'm optimistic about the opportunities that will come from some of the modernization, some of the changes. As I've just been watching kind of on the sidelines, so some of the challenges in the real estate agent space, with NAR, the National Association of Realtors, and challenges to their longstanding commission models and online data and stuff. I mean, appraisers are not the only ones that are challenged, but also given opportunities by technology, by disruptive, forces and influences that are out there. And it's uncomfortable, on the one hand, but on the other, it breeds opportunity. And I look forward to where the space is going to be in the coming years. It's, we'll have many that are retiring. We're going to have what will be interesting to see, and kind of a new generation that have PREA as an option to getting into the space that's never been that opportunity before. And I think it will, have some strengths and weaknesses there, but I think there's the opportunity for people that will embrace technology and kind of a new approach to valuation on the residential side. It remains to be seen if that's a net positive or not. I think, and I hope that it will be, but with the change comes opportunity. And I think that in the next 2 years, as we see an update in UAD formatting and appraisal reporting, the way that the reports get written and transmitted, again, there will be opportunity. There will be some challenges with that, but I'm optimistic that even with the challenges, that there's the opportunity for appraisers to progress and improve and find ways to do what they've been doing better and more efficiently, more effectively. So I'm looking forward to that.
Well, Jeff, I really appreciate it. Friends, as I told you, there was so much value here in this short time with Jeff. And I just appreciate him sharing his experience, his perspective, working with Dad, working with the business partner, residential, commercial, getting stuck up in the mountains and having the cat pull him out. I mean, just all kinds of things. For some of you city folk, this is a great opportunity. You definitely need to be sharing this to a lot of your city folks so they can understand some of these rural and non-urban kind of assignments. So definitely make sure to be sharing this out even more. And thank you again for the feedback and the encouragement. Of course, if ever be of any assistance, feel free to reach out. But with that, we're going to bring this to a close. Again, Jeff, thank you so much.
It's been my pleasure, Michael. Thank you for having me.
You are welcome. We are very grateful for it. Until the next episode, keep on enjoying this brand new year and the forthcoming opportunities.
Thanks for listening to this week's episode of Paru Zing's Appraisers on Purpose. We hope you enjoyed learning from the amazing professional paths and achievements of our beloved guests. Before we go, please subscribe on your listening channel, Spotify, LinkedIn, YouTube, and other podcast channels to hear more from appraisers and valuers regarding their life and their work. After you drop a comment below, who is one friend and peer you can generously share this episode with? If you have any suggestions or questions for future episodes, we'd love to hear from you. Just send us a message on LinkedIn and we'll be sure to get back to you. Thanks again for listening, and until we're together again for the next session of Paru Zing's Appraisers on Purpose, create the change that you seek.